Jonas Redd was a ghost long before anyone knew his name. A former paramedic turned mountain recluse, he slipped through towns unnoticed, leaving behind no address, no digital footprint, only silence and death. When 6 people were found executed in a remote Colorado cabin with no trace of the killer, his name meant nothing. But as bodies continued to appear, each scene colder and more calculated than the last, investigators began to uncover a chilling truth. Jonas Redd hadn't just vanished, he had been preparing for years. And what they were chasing wasn't a madman. It was a blueprint for the perfect killer. On a cold January morning in 2023, the town of Aspen Falls, Colorado, woke to a silence that felt heavier than the snow covering the streets. Located near the edge of a vast forest, Aspen Falls had always been a quiet retreat, a place where tourists skied by day and locals slept soundly at night. That peace shattered when a neighbor reported something unusual: an untouched car parked in front of a vacation cabin for 3 days straight. When sheriff deputies arrived, what they discovered inside the cabin sent shockwaves through the community. 6 bodies lay sprawled across 2 rooms, each one executed with a single bullet to the head. No one had heard anything. No gunshots. No screams. The windows were intact, and the doors were locked from the inside. It was as if time had stopped for everyone inside that cabin. The victims weren't connected in any obvious way. A retired couple from Phoenix had rented the cabin for a winter getaway. A pair of teenage hikers from Denver had reportedly stopped by to ask for directions 2 days earlier. The last 2 victims were identified as a local real estate agent and her assistant, who had been showing nearby properties. None of them had known each other, yet all of them died in the same place, under the same roof, on the same day. Investigators combed through the scene looking for anything: a fingerprint, a shoe print in the snow, a single clue. But nothing made sense. The snow around the cabin was untouched. No tire tracks, no boot prints. It hadn't snowed since the day of the murders, meaning the killer hadn't walked or driven away. It was like he had simply vanished into thin air. Inside the cabin, everything was disturbingly clean. No signs of a struggle. The furniture was undisturbed. Even the mugs on the kitchen counter were still full of cold coffee. The bodies had been carefully positioned, almost ritualistically, each one facing the front door. The coroner estimated they had all died within a 10-minute span. The sheriff's office immediately called in state investigators, who arrived with crime scene units and behavioral analysts. But even they were left scratching their heads. Nothing about the case felt normal. The town of Aspen Falls fell into panic. For the first time in years, families began locking their doors in the middle of the day. Gun stores saw a sudden spike in sales. Schools closed early, and snowmobile trails that ran close to the woods were shut down entirely. News vans appeared almost overnight, broadcasting live from snowy fields and foggy forest roads. Some locals claimed the killer had to be someone from out of town. Others whispered that it was someone they knew, someone who had snapped. But the truth was, no one could explain how 6 people had died in total silence, without a trace of who had done it or how. What had once been a peaceful mountain town was now ground zero for one of the most baffling mass murders in Colorado's history. 2 weeks after the horrifying cabin murders, the town of Aspen Falls was still reeling. Fear clung to every conversation, and people who once left their doors unlocked now triple-checked every bolt. But just as investigators were beginning to slow down and run out of leads, another gruesome scene emerged, this time over 60 miles away, near a quiet overlook in Silver Ridge, Colorado. Early one morning, a park ranger noticed an SUV parked oddly close to the guardrail, its engine off and windows frosted over. He approached, thinking someone may have fallen asleep or broken down. What he found inside would deepen the mystery that had already consumed the state. Inside the vehicle, a family of 4 was seated as if frozen in time. 2 adults in the front seats, and 2 children ages 9 and 11 in the back. All of them were dead. No wounds were immediately visible. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, and nothing had been taken from the car. The doors were locked. The ranger backed away and called in local police, who quickly secured the scene. The medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death. Each family member had been killed with a single gunshot to the base of the skull, just like the Aspen Falls victims. But this time, there was something different. In the snow near the vehicle, about 15 feet from the rear bumper, officers found a symbol drawn in blood. It was a circle with an X slashed through it, almost like a target. At first, it seemed like it could be a hoax or a copycat. But the blood was real. Lab results confirmed it came from the father, who had no visible injuries that would explain how his blood ended up outside the vehicle. The killer had moved the body or used a small amount of blood deliberately, as if leaving a calling card. Security footage from a wildlife camera set up nearby captured only a glimpse of a figure dressed in dark clothing, wearing a large backpack, walking alone toward the woods. The camera didn't show a face, no license plate, no indication of a vehicle. It appeared the person had approached the overlook from the forest and then vanished the same way. This second scene rocked investigators to the core. The connection between both killings was undeniable. Same execution method, same lack of evidence, same eerie silence. And now, a symbol. The media quickly latched onto it, dubbing the unknown suspect the crosshatch killer, referencing the X through the circle. Behavioral analysts from the FBI were brought in, and the case was escalated to a multi-jurisdictional task force. They believed this wasn't just a serial killer, it was someone deeply methodical, someone who knew how to move in scene and leave no trail. Panic spread beyond Aspen Falls and into the wider region. People avoided mountain roads, cabins stayed empty, and tourists canceled trips. The killer wasn't just striking at random. He had a plan, and law enforcement was no closer to understanding it. 1 month after the murders in Silver Ridge, the state of Colorado remained in a state of quiet terror. Despite the efforts of over a dozen law enforcement agencies, no arrest had been made. Tips poured in from across the country, but none of them led anywhere. Every false lead only deepened the mystery. People stopped asking who the killer was and began asking if they would ever be caught. Then came the break. Investigators desperately needed an attack that didn't go exactly as planned. In the foothills outside of Boulder, a remote ranch house became the site of the killer's third known crime scene. But this time, there was a survivor. The house belonged to a family of 5. On a cold February night, something triggered the home's silent alarm: a shattered basement window. By the time police arrived, 4 members of the family were dead. The 5th, a 22-year-old college student named Mia Landon, was found hidden beneath the crawl space in a panicked, barely conscious state. She had been the only one awake when the killer entered. Instead of running, she crawled into the narrow space beneath the floorboards, where she remained for nearly 2 hours without moving. Her account was fragmented, shaped by fear and adrenaline, but she remembered the way the killer moved. She described slow, deliberate footsteps and an eerie calm. No yelling, no rushing. It was as if the person knew exactly what to do, following a silent routine. Most importantly, Mia remembered seeing a faint tattoo when the killer's pant leg lifted slightly while walking near a floor vent. It was a red serpent, coiled tightly around a number, possibly a 7 or a 4. That tiny detail broke open the case. Police used the description to search national tattoo databases and criminal records. After eliminating dozens of names, a small cluster of people emerged who fit a specific profile: ex-military, no digital footprint, and ties to Colorado. One man stood out from the rest: Jonas Redd, a 41-year-old former paramedic who had vanished from public records 5 years earlier after being questioned in a missing persons case. Redd had once lived in multiple Colorado towns, including Silver Ridge and Aspen Falls. He had no family, no current address, and no job. But old records showed he had a red serpent tattoo from his time in a survivalist militia in Wyoming, disbanded after several members were arrested for illegal weapons stockpiling. Investigators now had a name, but tracking Redd down proved difficult. His driver's license was expired, his phone had been disconnected for years, and his last known vehicle had been sold in cash through an untraceable deal. He didn't exist in the digital world. He was a ghost. The FBI added Jonas Redd to its most wanted list. Photos of him were distributed nationwide, but no sightings came in. It was as if he had already anticipated every move law enforcement would make. For the first time, authorities admitted they weren't chasing a typical killer, they were hunting someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of pursuit. As the manhunt for Jonas Redd intensified, investigators began retracing his last known movements through wilderness areas, off-grid communities, and abandoned properties across Colorado. Eventually, they uncovered a lead from a forest ranger who recalled seeing a man matching Redd's description years ago near Pike National Forest. Deep within the forest, there was a cabin that hadn't been on any map or real estate record. It had no electricity, no plumbing, and no road access. When a search team hiked in, what they found inside the cabin confirmed their worst fears. The exterior was camouflaged with branches and netting, making it almost invisible from a distance. Inside, the air was dry and stale. A single cot, rusted tools, and boxes of canned food filled one corner. But it was the basement that truly shocked the team. Hidden beneath a trapdoor was a reinforced steel door secured with a makeshift locking system. After forcing it open, they stepped into a room that was more bunker than basement. The walls were lined with maps, photos, and lists of names, some of which matched the victims from the Aspen Falls and Silver Ridge killings. Surveillance images, likely taken with hidden trail cameras, showed people entering their homes, hiking trails, and even grocery stores. On one table sat a stack of cassette tapes labeled only with dates. Each one was neatly organized and stored in waterproof containers. Investigators brought them back to the lab for analysis, unsure of what they had stumbled upon. When the tapes were played, a chilling voice filled the room. Calm, emotionless, and deliberate, Jonas Redd narrated his thoughts in a monotonous tone. He described the planning of each murder in cold detail: timing, approach routes, escape plans. There was no anger, no remorse. It was as if he were reading grocery lists. One tape described the Aspen Falls cabin as an experiment in control. Another referred to the Silver Ridge overlook as a test of containment. He referred to each crime as a lesson, and each victim as a variable. The most unsettling part came in the final tapes, where he repeated a single phrase: still unfinished, still unfinished, still unfinished. On the far wall of the bunker, investigators discovered the same symbol found at the Silver Ridge crime scene: a circle with an X through it, drawn in dried blood. Beneath it was another message in faded red ink: this is only a beginning. The implication was clear: Redd wasn't acting on impulse. He had created a blueprint, a philosophy, a mission. Alongside the tapes, they found a list of locations scattered across 3 states, many of them isolated and hard to access. It appeared Redd had been scouting these places for years. Each site included notes about population density, law enforcement response times, and camera coverage. This wasn't a killer who had snapped this, was someone who had trained himself to be invisible. But Jonas Redd was no longer at the cabin. Based on evidence found in the bunker, authorities estimated he had left just days before they arrived. They were close but not close enough, and with every hour that passed, the fear grew that he was already planning his next move. The final chase for Jonas Redd became one of the largest coordinated manhunts in Colorado's history. With the discovery of his hidden bunker and detailed plans, authorities now knew the scale of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a killer; they were tracking a man who had spent years studying wilderness, surveillance blind spots, and how to vanish without a trace. His maps listed locations across Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, and the FBI believed he had caches of supplies hidden throughout the region. Every trail, every remote cabin, every unguarded road became a possible escape route. Search teams were flown in from neighboring states. Drones, thermal scanners, and bloodhounds combed through miles of forest, but the terrain was unforgiving and vast. Then, a thermal drone picked up a faint heat signature deep in the Rocky Mountains near the Wyoming border, an area so remote it wasn't accessible by vehicle. A SWAT team was deployed by helicopter and began moving toward the heat source under cover of darkness. The cave, nestled into a rock wall, was barely visible, but as the team closed in, there was no sign of movement, no sound from inside. They expected resistance, possibly even a firefight. Instead, they found Redd sitting cross-legged near a small fire, surrounded by a circle of notebooks and cassette tapes. He looked thinner, almost skeletal, but calm, as if he had been waiting for them. He didn't speak, didn't resist. His face was blank, empty of emotion. Behind him on the cave wall, written in black marker, were the words, "There are more like me." The message sent shockwaves through the task force. It wasn't clear whether it was a bluff, a delusion, or a warning. As Redd was taken into custody, agents recovered several new tapes and notebooks, each filled with the same analytical tone. He had written detailed profiles of other individuals, men and women across the country who had gone off the grid, displayed antisocial behavior, or had military backgrounds. Whether he knew these people or simply imagined them remained a mystery. During interrogation, Redd refused to answer any questions. He didn't request a lawyer. He didn't ask about the charges against him. He simply stared forward, unblinking. Psychiatrists diagnosed him as deeply disassociated, possibly suffering from a rare form of obsessive delusional disorder. But that didn't explain the extreme patience, the planning, or the disturbing precision of his crimes. Even after his arrest, the FBI continued to follow the trail he left behind. Several cold cases were reopened across 3 states. Some of the names on his maps matched missing persons reports going back years. The people of Aspen Falls finally had a name and a face to attach to their nightmares, but the fear didn't entirely disappear. The tapes, the maps, and the message on the cave wall all hinted at something bigger. Whether that was true or not, no one could say for sure. What was clear was this: Jonas Redd didn't see himself as finished. In his mind, he had simply been testing the system, learning its weaknesses. And though his hands were now bound, his legacy of fear still lingered in the silence of the mountains he once called home.